So I'd like to start off tonight's festivities by talking a little bit about the quote that's up here on the board. It says, the ecological thought is a virus that infects all other areas of thinking. This is from a book called The Ecological Thought from 2010 by Timothy Morin. The ecological thought is a virus that infects all other areas of thinking. So the first question, obviously, what is the ecological thought? The ecological thought, as explained in Mr. Morin's book, can basically be described in three basic principles. Everything is connected. Everything that happens in the world is related and interrelated to everything else that happens in the world. We see that in ecology, and we also see that in many other spheres of human endeavor. All action is interactive, meaning that action doesn't take place in a void. Every action has consequences and effects. Some foreseen, some unforeseen, but always rippling and interacting with other things that are happening in the world. And finally, the final premise of ecological thought is that we are the world, to use the name of a famous 1980s charity song. We are the world, meaning that we as human beings are not separate from the physical earth, but we are actually part of it. We're made up of the same stuff that the earth is made out of, and we're part of the animal kingdom and part of the human community. We are the world. So that's the ecological thought. What does it mean that the ecological thought is a virus that infects all other areas of thinking? Well, of course, we're familiar with the fact that ecological thought plays an important role in environmental science and shaping the way we think about environmental factors that are going on in the world. But there are also other ways that ecological thought influences us and other endeavors of human behavior, where ecology and ecological styles of thinking have played an important role. Just to name a few, in business and in finance, just to give one of many possible examples, in the 20th century, the dominant marketing paradigm was that you had advertisers who would advertise to basically passive audience. And if you wanted more customers, you would just advertise more and try to spit that message out louder and louder and more pervasively. Whereas in the 21st century, businesses have developed much more sophisticated ecological styles of marketing, where they actually create ecosystems and environmental niches for their products and encourage potential customers to create their own ecosystems within each other, among each other. In politics, the dominant paradigm in the second half of the 20th century was the Cold War, where the USSR and the United States represented two polar opposites that were in conflict, and all the other countries kind of lined up on one side or the other. But in the 21st century, as we're seeing around the world, politics is not a question of us versus them or black versus white. Instead, foreign policy is about managing the dynamic variety of different populations and trying to get people to work together and trying to find common ground. It might even be the case that an ally in one situation is a foe in another situation, and vice versa. This is ecological thinking at a geopolitical level. Of course, in media, we're all familiar with the way that social media have revolutionized what it means to do media or to have a media sphere. And of course, the media ecosystem is very similar in many ways to what ecologists have learned about the natural ecosystems around the world. And this is true to such an extent and in so many different ways that society and even personal identity themselves are becoming redefined in these ecological terms, so that people don't necessarily identify themselves as an individual, alone in space. Every individual and every society is connected to other individuals and other societies in a networked, systemic kind of way that is very similar to what you see in environmental studies. So the ecological thought is going around being a virus in all these different ways, infecting all these different areas of human endeavor. So it's only natural that the ecological thought would also infect writing, the teaching of writing or composition studies. There, just to very briefly provide an overview of some of the latest trends in the teaching of writing. Of course, many teachers in the 21st century, writing teachers, encourage their students to write about specifically ecological themes, about questions about the relationship between human beings and their environment. But there are many other ways that ecological paradigms inform the way that writing, teaching, the teaching of writing is done. Brain-based education considers learners from a neurological perspective. a brain-based educator thinks about how the brain metabolizes energy, what it needs to metabolize energy effectively, and thinks about the brain as an open system, rather than just something that's contained in an individual student's skull. A flipped classroom where students do their homework at home and do their, do their homework in the classroom and watch lectures at home represents another kind of inversion of between the regular way that the classroom is related to the world. So the classroom is brought into the world, and the world is brought into the classroom. Distance learning and hybrid models are also other examples of this. And then, of course, there are broader trends in writing instruction, including student-centered classrooms, which obviously are very ecological in the emphasis that they place on the background of individual students and their specific context and relationships. Process writing, which encourages students to think of writing not as a finished product, but as a series of drafts and revisions, also has grounding in ecological thought. Experiential learning, which puts students in particular situations where they learn by experiencing what writing is like out in the real world. And also, of course, the more social media comes into the classroom, the more this ecological mindset permeates the way that writing is taught, and in fact, the way that teaching is done in all the disciplines across the board. And ecology is a really powerful thing. This is an example from physics, but to me, it's actually really a representation of how ecological systems work. Of course, as you all know from physics classes, this little ball up at the top of this hill has a lot of energy. It has potential energy. But where is the energy? The energy in that ball is not in the ball itself. It's not in that isolated piece of matter. In fact, it's in the relationship between the ball and the hill, and in fact the relationship between the ball and the hill and the entire gravitational field of the Earth itself, and the energy of moving the ball down the hill with just a nudge is actually exploiting or taking advantage of the environmental or ecological context in which the ball exists. So the idea is that you can do a lot of work, you can get a lot of work done if you recognize the ecological situation. Rather than just focusing on the ball itself, try to think about how the ball and the hill interact to get work done. And this is the same thing that happens in judo, where martial artists use the lines of force that are coming at them from an opponent to flip the opponent, or to use the energy that's already present in the opponent's actions as a source of energy to move the opponent, to flip the opponent over, or to dodge out of the way, or to do anything else that the martial artist is trying to do. And writing is very much like this. When a writer is successful, it's usually not simply because of some burst of inspiration that comes out of nowhere for an individual writer. It's because a writer has found a situation where their natural talents link up in an organic way with a particular audience, or a particular project, or a particular task, particular writing task that the writer is doing. So by thinking about ecological systems, and by thinking of the classroom as an extension or as an embodiment of an ecological system, I believe that it's possible to get a lot of interesting writing done and to make it also kind of fun, and less of less work in the traditional sense. So I think we can make a distinction between ecological thinking, which is what we've been talking about, and what we might call non-ecological thinking. And to just be very, to maybe be very crude, I would suggest that ecological thinking is the thinking of the present and hopefully of the future, whereas non-ecological thinking, I think, is very well represented by, say, the 20th century, the previous century, and the dominant kinds of thinking that were, in style at that time. So ecological thinking, everything is connected. Non-ecological thinking suggests that no, everything is not connected. Objects exist independently for themselves in their own spaces. Ecological thinking suggests that all action is interactive. Non-ecological thinking would deny this and say, no, action is isolated and autonomous. When you do something, you do it, it redounds back on yourself, but it doesn't necessarily have any relationship to what goes on outside of the individual action. And rather than singing, "We are the world," a non-ecological thinking person would say that human beings and the world are two different things. That human beings do their thing, the world does their thing, and they don't have any relationship with each other. So what I'd like to think about is how we can use some of these ecological principles to rethink or revisit some of the standard elements of the teacher relationship or the classroom environment. So these are non-ecological students. As you can see, it's not even so much that they're not all engaged. Some of these students look like they're very busy doing whatever they're doing. But what is interesting about this picture is just the way that it demonstrates that each of those students is isolated in their own separate desk, working on their own separate task, and they're not interrelated to anything that's going on around them. Whereas the ecological student is represented, I think, more by a kind of network-style diagram of the type that I have projected up here. And just looking around this room and thinking about the student teams that you'll be hearing from in a few minutes, it actually represents very closely this kind of network model. The individual teams work not by themselves, but in a network of colleagues that extends not only to among the relationships in the class, but also to other factors outside of the classroom. To things involving the students' own personal relationships, their interrelationships with each other, and also their relationships with the partner organizations and with some of the other things that they've been doing outside of the classroom. Non-ecological teachers, I think, are best represented by this image from 1980 movie Pink Floyd's The Wall, where this kind of very cartoonish, evil teacher pushes students down into a meat grinder, and they come out as ground chuck from the other end. Obviously, not like the ecological paradigm. Ecological teachers, on the other hand, I have been moving away from using the word teacher altogether in preference of some other ways of thinking about the teacher-student relationship. I like to think of a teacher as a literary agent, someone whose job is to get students published, to find what it is that students do well, what story they have to tell, or what message they have to spread, and try to work with the student to see how they can best spread that message. I try to think of the teacher role as that of an editor, someone who's not grading or evaluating even student writing, but is trying to work with the student to try to make their language as clear as possible so that they can reach the widest possible audience and have the largest possible effect. A publisher, someone who works with a student to get published. A life coach, someone who works with a student to try to identify what they want to get out of the classroom environment, out of the experience in the classroom, and to try to use those skills to further their own interests and their own career goals. A project manager, this is very much how I feel working with this class this semester. Rather than me trying to tell the students in the class what they should be doing, my role throughout the semester has largely been just to facilitate and create an environment so that students can do their own work and the teams can get together to decide what they need to do and how best to do it. I work as a liaison with the partner organizations and with other community organizations and with other programs in the school to try to make sure that everybody's working as effectively as they can together. And mostly I try to advocate for the students themselves and to be on their side and try to promote their vision of what they want to achieve in a writing class. Non-ecological content, this is what is taught in a class. This is just a random diagram from another school about how the content is determined for an individual course. And as you can see, even if you can't read the individual boxes, I'll tell you there's nothing here about the student or about what students want or expect or need from a classroom. Rather, the content in this particular institution is determined by various committees and boards and different organizations that have nothing to do with a specific discipline. And in too many of college classrooms, this is in fact the way the curriculum is designed by committees that are not associated with the classroom in any way. Whereas ecological content is very much all about what is going on in the classroom and the interactions that are taking place there. The writing situation itself, what the students are writing about, why they're writing, who they're writing for, that becomes the content of the class. The students' backgrounds, the skills that they bring in, or the skills that they need, the skills that they're still developing, those become the determinants that make the curriculum come together. The students' own aspirations, as I mentioned just a little while ago, what the students want to get out of class should be at the center of what the instructor is trying to teach, and that would be how ecological content would be determined. Students' relationships with one another, obviously a key part of the ecological classroom. the instructor's own perceptions, my own ideas about what I expect the class to become are under scrutiny in a class that's ecologically minded. It's not a hierarchy where the teacher is passing down instructions or assignments or advice to students. Rather, it's an ecological system where everybody is connected to each other, including, I think, the instructor as well. And of course, the discursive ecosystem, which is just a fancy way of saying what people are writing about, what are the opportunities for writing that exist in a particular time and place, who needs writing done, who is available to do writing. And all of these different factors become part of the course itself. Non-ecological classroom, of course, is just a room. It's got desks, and it's a square or rectangular-ish space with a door and stuff like that. But in our classroom, we've tried to think ecologically and to extend the walls of the classroom all the way out so they embrace the larger community, and especially our small business partners. I think the students would agree that a lot of the most important work that takes place in the class this semester has taken place not in the classroom itself, but in outside the classroom, in the meetings that the teams have scheduled outside of class hours, or in their particular relationships and interactions with the community, with small business partners that they've been working with to develop annual reports, employee manuals, and other kinds of business documents. These places of business actually become extensions of the classroom. And so the classroom is not just a physical location, it's extended in a network or a web throughout the whole region. Non-ecological assignments, I think of non-ecological assignments like an exercise bike, like riding an exercise bike. It's healthy, it gets you, can help you stay in shape, but it doesn't bring you anywhere, it doesn't go anywhere. As many people know from taking English classes, student puts a lot of work into writing an assignment, they give it to the teacher puts a lot of work into grading the assignment, gives it back to the student, and then what happens to the assignment? It gets thrown out, or it gets put in a file and never read again, or it gets put on the refrigerator for a brief period of time, but eventually it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't really do anything. Whereas we have a wonderful example of what I would consider an ecological style assignment from this semester. One of the students in class, all the students in the class wrote white papers and had them published on Digital Commons, which is the institutional internet-based repository for work that's done at Goodwin College. One of the neat things about Digital Commons is that you can see where people have downloaded the work that's been posted to that website. And so this is Eric's paper called 4 Tips to Harness Your Emotional Intelligence in the Workplace. This is a paper that Eric wrote about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We put it up on the internet about a week or so after that. And just last week when I was looking around through Digital Commons to see where Eric's paper has been read, I know that you can't read this, so I'll read it to you. It's been read in the United Kingdom, it's been read in Suriname, which is a country in South America, just in case you don't know. It was read in Zurich, Switzerland. It was read in Pakistan, in Punjab, Pakistan. So all of these far-flung corners of the globe are reading Eric's paper about emotional intelligence, and it's amazing. Not only is it a wonderful example of the power of writing to spread a message far and wide in the age of the internet, but also, I think that it's amazing that Eric has been able to share his message about emotional intelligence to all these places that I think many of them could actually use a little bit more emotional intelligence, like in places like Pakistan. Yeah, if they're getting lessons about emotional intelligence, that's a great thing. And that can only be a good thing, and it can only help Eric continue our mission at Goodwin College and the mission of English 325, and what I think is the mission of all of us, which is to save the world, to use writing to help share our experiences, our ideas, our thoughts with a wider world. And not only will we spread, emotional intelligence or whatever it is that we're writing about, or general awareness, but also I think just the fact that people are thinking in these ecological ways, even if it doesn't have anything to do specifically with nuclear waste or with building dams or any of the typical things that we normally think about as ecological issues, the thinking that is involved in ecological thinking, whether you're thinking about environmental issues or any of these other areas of endeavor, I think has a power and a capacity to help bring us together, to help break down the walls between people, and to help people think in a more sophisticated style about what they're doing when they're writing or when they're learning anything. Here in English 225, not only are we providing a useful service for local business people, and not only are we learning ourselves about successful strategies for expressing ourselves, but also we're helping in our own way to save the world. So thank you very much, and I hope that you enjoy the other presentations tonight.